My name is LuAnn White. I'm a professor of environmental health and toxicology at Tulane School of Public Health, and I'm the director for the Center for Applied Environmental Public Health. Well, there's many different kinds of science. It's not one thing that is just in one stovepipe. There's people from chemistry. Myself, I'm a toxicologist, so I look at how the compounds act in the environment and how they come in contact with people, and then the effects on people. There's biologists, particularly the marine biologists, who are looking at the various aquatic life and the marine animals that live along the coastline. There's engineers that are looking at the drilling processes, the remediation processes. So there's a whole host of various types of professionals who work on these types of projects. I don't know what the surface area of the Gulf is. When we talk about dispersants, I'll talk about some volume numbers. But the Gulf is a pretty big place, even for all of the oil that's come out. And what we don't see is just a solid mass of oil. We see more or less ribbons of oil, and that's the emulsification loop, the mousse that's out there. Next to the wellhead, they can measure more oil. The further you get from the wellhead, the more dilute it becomes, or it bunches up in these long strips or ribbons. If you've seen any of the pictures, it's not a solid blend of oil. I took a flight a few weeks ago, and you would see a group of these ribbons, and then you wouldn't see anything in another group of the ribbons. The other thing that's happened is that there's a very thin sheen. Just the physical properties of oil is that it doesn't stay glumped up; it spreads out over the surface of the water. So a lot of what we see is, a thin sheen that's just, very, very thin, a couple of monolayer of the oil. So when it's coming on shore, we're getting a combination of the sheen and of this mousse. The mousse is very goopy and very sticky, and that's causing some of the problems. If it further weathers, and weathering is a process where once it leaves that wellhead, it starts breaking down, where it's only the very highest molecular weight compounds, these long chain diaphatic hydrocarbons, and they form literally tar balls. It's very similar to the asphalt which paves many streets. So in the trip from the top of the water onto the coastline, what we're seeing is a transition of that oil. We're losing the lower molecular weight compounds, the higher molecular weight compounds remain. So there's a physical change in that oil in that 50 plus miles trip from the well site back to the coastline. Okay, we don't know the answer to all those questions, but we can break it down into its components and think this through in a very logical manner. Let's start with the oil as it leaves the wellhead down at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. The well is 5,000 feet below the surface. That is a mile deep. So the oil has to travel through essentially 1 mile of water. If we think of that in terms of a scrubber, that's a 5,000-foot scrubber, which would be immensely long in any kind of industrial setting. So during that travel that journey from the bottom of the Gulf to the surface of the water, a number of, particularly the smaller molecular weight hydrocarbons, are stripped out. They're not very water soluble, but think how much water is there. So by the time it gets to the surface, some of the volatiles and some of the smaller molecular weight hydrocarbons have been dissolved into the water. Once it gets on top of the water, we're in South Louisiana. It's very hot, so any of the volatile organics that remain evaporate into the atmosphere in a day, maybe 2 at the very most. I've seen estimates of 4 hours. So what we have left are really the longer chain hydrocarbons, and it forms this thicker kind of mousse, or eventually it will weather further into tar balls. Now the mousse is really an emulsification. As the oil comes up, it gets mixed and blended into a very thick emulsification with the water. So the methane that comes off will form hydrates, and there are some theories that there's some methane hydrates that were formed and are still in the Gulf waters. So we have to break the oil down into its many components. And so we can't think of it as just oil. We have to think about it in terms of what makes up that crude oil. Now here we have Louisiana light sweet crude oil. Sweet means it doesn't have much sulfur. Sour crude has a lot of sulfur. The reason it's called sweet is in the very early days of drilling, the wildcatters used to taste it, and if it tasted sour, it had sulfur. If it tasted sweet, it didn't have sulfur. Oil without sulfur is more valuable. Light means it has more of the lighter molecular weight compounds in it. The heavier crude has more of the longer molecular weight compounds. So as we go through this, there are those who estimate that the amount of natural gas that's being given off, the methane and up to butane, and the volatiles comprise 40, and I've even seen estimates as high as 50% of the total volume of the oil. So the amount of oil that leaves the ground at that leak is substantially reduced in a very short time just because of the volatilization principles. Well, I think that's probably more in relation to the dispersants.
Okay.
Because what the dispersants do is they act like soap. They're surfactants. And a surfactant's job is to, one end of that molecule is lipid soluble, the other end is water soluble. It breaks the oil up into little droplets that allows it to go beneath the surface of the Gulf. Surfactants, or the dispersants, are used as a mean to control the oil spills. And if you can get it, it's a trade-off. It's no other way to say it, because we're moving it from one environmental phase to another. We're moving it from the surface of the water down into the water column. When we do that, it prevents as much from getting to the shoreline and getting into our estuaries. So use of dispersants is saving our estuaries. The trade-off is that oil is getting into the water column, and we don't know what's happening to the marine organisms when it's in that water column. But the principle of the dispersants is it breaks it into tiny little droplets, and which make it more biodegradable. In the Gulf of Mexico, there are literally thousands of species of microorganisms that chew up oil. Here in the Gulf, we have natural seepage of oil, we have oil spills, we have tankers. So our microorganisms are very well primed to break down the oil. So what the dispersants do is that they move it into the water column. Now, some of the research ships have found some underwater plumes. Their concentrations are very low, part per million, part per billion in many cases, and they're found very close to the well site. Their questions are, has some of that gone deeper? So as we go deeper, the various conditions change. We don't know what all the microorganisms are going to be. It's colder. It's very much colder at those depths. There's no sunlight, so it's darker, which would make you think that the biodegradation would be slower. So are there plumes that have gotten down at that 4,000, 3,000 foot level that will take longer, and what will the effect of those plumes be? And I don't think we know the answer to that yet. Well, it's hard to say without knowing the numbers and what was used. Initially, the dispersants were used, they were doing aerial spraying. And then they started using deep water injection, spraying the dispersants right at the well site. There's been a lot of controversy about the dispersants, but I think it's because people just don't understand what they are. I mean, dispersants are literally many of the same compounds that you have in household products. If you have grease in a frying pan, you put dishwashing soap in there, stir it up, it becomes a foamy liquid. You can wash it down your drain. That's essentially what dispersants are doing. I think people got very confused and upset because initially when people say, well, what are these dispersants? It was a proprietary compound. So they wouldn't give out the formula. That made people think that there was something very toxic in them. the news reporters picked it up as toxic dispersants. And there was the general feeling is if you have all of this oil being put in the Gulf, why are we adding more chemicals? And I think there's a truly lack of understanding of how you can use some of these things to control the oil spill. But nonetheless, dispersants are a well-established tool for controlling oil spills. The deep sea dispersant is what we don't know very much about, particularly at the depths, the pressures, and the temperature that they're using them. What we do know is when they are using dispersants in that manner, there's much less oil on the surface, which is the principle for using it. So that means much less dispersants actually gets to the shoreline. But the dispersants is going into the water column, and we don't know what's happening there. But they have been effective in that. We do know that when they're used in this deep sea injection, they are using much less dispersant, and that's because they're applying them right at the source, and you don't need as much to get the oil as if you're just spreading it over a wide area and hoping some of that gets to the oil. There are formulas for how many gallons of dispersants to use for the amount of oil that's there. And so to be used correctly, I assume that they're doing the appropriate calculations and using the amount of dispersant that is needed for the oil. I know that they have cut back substantially. Part of that is because in the deep sea use, they don't need to use near as much because they can put it right at the source. Well, what we know is that the oil will follow the flooding. So as the water comes up, any oil that is in the water is going to get deeper into the estuaries, deeper into the coastline, because it will float with that. So that's the bad news. The good news is that the turbulence from a hurricane will act as even a greater dispersant and break up the oil. When we had rough seas from the two tropical storms, Bonnie and Alex, we actually saw less oil on the surface simply because it was stirring it up. The fears of people that the oil will condense and we'll just have oil over everywhere is probably more out of fear than it is fact. Any oil that's in the water is going to go where there's flooding, but we're not going to have oil mysteriously volatilize and be carried very far places. That's just not the physical and chemical properties of the oil.
What about rain? If there's rain or a system that comes over the Gulf and the water is picked up into a cloud, is that oil picked up and distributed as well?
Any oil that would be picked up would probably be volatilized, so it's going to be the more volatile component. The oil that's remaining now are these very long hydrocarbons, C22, C45. I mean, they are fairly heavy, inert. They're not going to volatilize, and they're not going to vaporize. So those are going to be there. What we probably will see is tar balls coming up on the beach for a very long period of time.